Hi, my name is Rae Benjamin. I am the CEO and founder of In the Cut LA, an organization dedicated to increasing transparency for Black creatives and other marginalized communities. We've worked with organizations like Sundance to create content. Seed and Spark, which is the #1 crowdfunding site in the world for filmmakers. And we're currently expanding and trying to just create more classes, more initiatives to give people the information that they so that they can succeed. And you can follow me on Instagram at In the Cut LA for just updates on opportunities, jobs, whatever is out there.
Hi, my name is Michèle Stephenson, and I'm a nonfiction storyteller based in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and I'm co-founder and director of our production company, Rada Studio, and very happy to be here, and thank you so much to the Philadelphia Latino Film Festival for having me. And I can be reached and followed on Instagram at Michèle0608, and we have our website is radastudio.org.
Thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed your film. I thought it was very, especially the directing. My favorite scene, honestly, was the last scene where Elena is, getting her hair done, and the beautiful dialogue voiceover that plays over that scene. I just thought it was very quiet, but to the point. But as a documentarian, I'm always interested because, I only write narrative things. So when you have such a large scope of, information that's non-fictional, how do you pick, I guess, sort of your protagonist to zero in and tell the story for that person?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really interesting that you're mentioning that because Elena, the story, is really the short film is a result of this feature that I worked on called Stateless that was at the festival actually last year. And we spent almost 5 years shooting, and Elena was actually a main sort of participant in that story when we were shooting. So I've gotten to know and have a relationship with her for that amount of time. She was actually somebody I was working with before I met the main participant of the feature film that is now the feature film. And what ended up happening, you'll understand as a writer and an understanding of story structure and beats and what's needed, is we had one character too many to really carry the story, and we really had to streamline. And so in the feature, it was extremely painful, but we had to remove Elena from that process in order to focus on very specific things that we felt held a dramatic tension and also kind of told a story that was kind of more succinct for an audience. And so what came out of that was some pain on my part, knowing that I had spent so much time, and that's part of answering your question around nonfiction. You develop relationships with people, right? They become your friends. Sometimes they become, almost family. They open up to you. There's so much in that relationship that happens. And it was really eating away at me that I felt that we left a story, for lack of a better word, on the cutting room floor that needed to be sort of told and unpacked, especially from a directorial point of view. Also, how we spent time on imagery and metaphor and how her story sort of really we felt was important, because it also ends on a relatively positive note as compared to the other pieces. So out of that, I felt we have a story here. I want to take the time to work on it, and ended up working on it for the most part on our own, and then got a little bit of funding to sort of finish in the post-production. And for me, what Elena represented, and so we kind of honed in on the fact that, one, she is, the leader of her family, right? And all of our protagonists in both of these stories are women, right? And that she kind of bears the burden, but also carries the dignity too, in terms of her journey. And so so then you diminish, and then you kind of reduce these into all of these different stickies, right? These all index cards that kind of show different elements of who she is and of her story. And then you kind of like build around the most emotional, important moments that you've captured, and then build story around that. Because, as you know, for us as nonfiction storytellers, emotion always comes first, then the rest comes later, right? And so we had the beautiful imagery that our cinematographer, Alfredo Alcantara, was really sort of tuned into, also just all the work, the environment that Elena was in. And so that's how we worked through it, understanding her as really the leader of her family, understanding that it ends on a high note for her, which I felt was really important, and the fact that she was able to vote. So we sort of built around that.
Yeah, I really appreciated that it ended positively because I think, you know, we're we've become like desensitized, I think, to seeing all this traumatic imagery. And of course that's real life, I don't want to sort of sugarcoat anyone's experiences, but I also think it's helpful just for, the collective to see things, to see people overcome and to see, oh, there is a way that I can be successful. And I loved Elena because she was so positive, not just for her, like you said, but people in her community, how she was encouraging people to go to school and to learn how to read, and for other people to, get their ID cards. So it was just a wonderful story, and showing that despite our circumstances, the only way we can sort of thrive is if we push back and don't just sit down and be resigned to what people force upon us. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's the idea of understanding, being aware of the systemic forces that exist, but then figuring out a way, right? Making a way out of no way, right? Which is what, our communities have always done, and being able to sort of highlight that to create not just connection, but also the idea that we're not alone in the process too. And for me, another thing that was really important when we're talking about directorial and a lot of, and how I kind of process this with our cinematographer is also, and it was interesting, this notion that, Elena has very fond memories and recollections of where she grew up, even though it's a poor, it was a poor environment, or continues to be. There are these, there are things and memories that we hold that help us continue also. And I sort of wanted to depict that visually, that there is beauty in all of this, without diminishing, of course, the difficulty, but understanding that we can hold both, right?
Yes,
So, and
yes.
we don't have to appeal to, for lack of for poverty porn, or
No, I agree. I think there's like a big trauma porn emphasis, and I'm someone that I don't like to create those sort of things. And even if I'm actually writing a show about Haiti right now, with my good friend who's Haitian. He grew up in Haiti, and it's a historical period piece. So, but part of our whole, wanting to write this was to show, that there's excellence, especially Haiti. They were the first Black country to revolt against colonial oppressors. And there's such a rich history that I think globally a lot of people don't know. So we wanted to show that.
that was successful, So
Yes,
those are my roots. I'm from Haiti as well.
yes. So, yes, yes. But as someone that I didn't really know anything about this humanitarian crisis, so it was really interesting to watch. And me being in America, just seeing direct parallels between sort of the anti-immigrant rhetoric we have here, and not just here. In the UK, you see similar things. In France, there's sort of like this global feeling of go away right now. What do you think is sort of lending to that? And I don't know, it was just very interesting to see literally the exact same words being used to describe a situation on the, opposite side of where I am.
Well, it's uh, global white supremacy and racial, racial capitalism at work at its best, And what is so interesting about this island is it's, as far as I'm concerned, Black people being racist against other Black people and therefore kind of not really even seeing their own connection to their African roots, right? And that's how white supremacy works, that cognitive dissonance, where I can even kind of alienate my own self and oppress people who are like me uh, for this myth that I can be whiter or be accepted in a larger white society. And so it's like a religion. I think it was Michèle Stephenson, who's a historian, talks about it being sort of this ontological sort of belief system around whiteness that we've all bought into. And I think even in our Latinx communities, we don't talk enough about colorism, the racism that exists, and that's very deep. I mean, more African slaves arrived in Mexico than they did in the United States. And where did they all go? And how has that been handled? And it all started on Hispaniola, on Haiti, that island. Christopher Columbus arrived there. It's where the first Africans arrived. It's where the first genocide against indigenous peoples happened. And it's where, enslavement first happened and where the racial caste system was established, right? So for me, it's like it started there and then it just permeated throughout the hemisphere, from as far north as Canada to down to Argentina, where, the boats arrived and took on its own sort of different aspect, whether it's, Jim Crow in the United States, the one drop rule, to the opposite side of the coin in places like the DR and Haiti as well. Any drop of whiteness you have makes you better, right? It's the other side of it. And that this is global, right? I mean, they colonized everywhere, right? The Europeans, the Dutch, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, and the English, let's not forget the English. This is how our capitalism works. And I don't think you can separate capitalism from its racist practices, right? They're kind of intertwined, whether it's immigration of Black and brown people through Mexico into the United States, how that's demonized, when 45 called the S-hole countries, that was a code again, racist code. So yeah, I think it permeates globally. So the one thing I do want to make the distinction, so there's the global idea around white supremacy that people believe in, because it's a belief system. So it has really nothing to do with facts. It has to do with the worldview that people buy into, depending on their upbringing and what they've been exposed to. But the flip side of that is there's global resistance, right? That Elena's not working by herself, right? That Black Lives Matter in the United States is also happening in Salvador Bahia, right? Or in certain places in Africa that are claiming greater autonomy and solidarity, and that we shouldn't forget that. Like when the murder of George Floyd happened, there was global protest. And on one note, Elena's colleague in the Dominican Republic was arrested by the Dominican police because they put up a memorial and put up a protest and a memorial in honor of George Floyd. So for them, it is even a threat, that this global resistance. So I feel that, hopefully, films like Elena and others kind of, sort of open the crack at opening, certainly within the Latinx communities, to discuss the issues of race and how we, unpack that, but also creating the solidarity that we need. I mean, one of the most powerful moments for me traveling with this film and the longer film called Stateless was with sharing with Afro-Colombian women in Cali who invited the film and who definitely saw themselves represented, and that sense of solidarity, I think, is really, really important for us to be able to keep moving forward. And I've talked too much, sorry.
Oh, that's great. The scene where, you know, she was, Elena was sort of arguing with the Dominican man, and he said, well, it's my country, but it's like, you look the same as me, and you're telling me to leave. That to me was so eye-opening, because I guess the forms of racism I'm used to seeing are really, you know, more nationality based. I guess it's more color based. So, and even when she was like trying to hail a cab, and they were like, oh no, she's African, it's okay, she's not Haitian, she's African. And that was just so mind-boggling to me. It just points, in my opinion, to the just absurdity of all of this. Like, we're all humans, we all have similar needs. And just, you know, looking up the history of how some borders were drawn and all these things, it just makes it like absurd. Like,
Yeah. Well, you know, two things I would say to that. One is we cannot disconnect anti-Haitianism from anti-Blackness, because that's what it is. The two are equatable. I mean, Haiti is a sore in the white supremacist global world, and it's always been one. And it kind of like is this thorn in the back, is like, we resisted, we're still paying the price, but we are Black. As much as there is colorism in Haiti, I can attest to that, that exists, but there is certainly no doubt that it is a Black nation, right? Given all of these sort of other stuff that's still been internalized. I mean, Haiti holds a space in the African Union. There's an honorary seat in the African Union. So it's important not to disassociate that, as you were saying, this idea of ethnicity versus race, because that's part of what white supremacy does, right? It's about nationality, not color. No, not really, because you're not saying this about the Venezuelans who are lighter skinned who are arriving, you know? So yeah, so that's one thing. The other point I wanted to make is this kind of idea about borders that you brought up. Borders are all about power, right? It's the power to be able to create exclusion, right? And to exclude the other from whatever it is advantages that you're having, and then to use the state and the government to practice it, right? So it becomes institutionalized, the power, and who has access and who's able to get papers, who's able to read, who's able to navigate the crazy bureaucracy. It's all about access to power. And I think if we understand borders from that perspective, you know, we can, I think, create maybe you know, sort of longer term pushback that can be more successful around pushing up against what does it really serve? What do borders really serve? What purpose do they serve? The same way that we talk about, you know, abolishing the carceral system, right? Mass incarceration. It's about reimagining, what does equity look like? Do we need these borders? And if we do, how? If we don't, then how? What kind of different world can we create that pushes back against power?
I agree. And that's something that, you know, I think a lot of people, especially when you've only seen one way of living, when you say these things, they're like, oh, you're a radical, you're crazy. But then when you sit back and sort of examine the origins of certain systems and who they benefit, who is now controlling the borders, how come, you know, a European settler could just come and stake claim and say, this is mine, and we accept that as normal. But if I do the same thing, like I'm insane, you know? So I think a lot of it is just unraveling a lot of things that we've normalized, but aren't necessarily the most beneficial things for humanity.
Exactly, yes.
Yes. Your film, I know we were talking about Haiti and, you know, just white supremacy. Have you seen Exterminate All the Brutes?
I have. I was about to reference it when we were talking, and I was like, well, this is about Elena, but yes.
No, the Haitians are
powerful.
winning. Yes.
So important, really, really
Yes.
important. I think, yeah, I highly recommend it to everybody I see. I think it's kind of a reckoning of what this global history really is, and it you know, It's an intersection of destroying the climate as well as destroying the other, and that extermination plan is real.
Oh, it is. And I really enjoyed that. Well, it's like a docu-series because there is a few episodes. So if you guys have HBO, highly recommend check out Exterminate All the Brutes. But I want to get more into, I guess, technical sort of things. As a writer and director, I'm always interested in how people, I guess, balance doing both of those things at the same time because I have never done it. It just seems like a lot of hard work. So how are you able to do both? I guess on the documentary side, are you rewriting things on set while things are being filmed, or is it sort of you just gathering footage and then finding the narrative after? I guess what's the process?
Well, with this kind of sort of observational, verite-driven filmmaking, what you end up going with when you're shooting on location are these kind of like broad strokes of what you think the narrative is, but you don't necessarily stay wedded to it, right? But you have this idea of things you want to hit. And then you just let things happen, but of course with some intention as to what there are always decisions that are being made as to what should be covered. But with this particular material, the story is definitely done in the edit, right? In the post, in conversations with the editor, because then the things sort of come out. But it doesn't mean you don't go out there with an intention. For example, with Elena, the big intention was seeing if she was going to be able to get her papers and what that meant for her and her family. Now, there were other things that started to happen. For example, her participation in the vote and going to vote was not necessarily something that, I knew from the beginning. But as, things evolved and we were in communication, we realized that this are important moments in her journey of recognition and validation as a citizen. And so we shot that material too. So it's a combination of some notion of what story you're looking to build, but being open and flexible to whatever happens in their life, right? That could be part of the larger story, and then really honing in the post. And so, we have a bunch of index cards and post-its up on the wall that are sometimes color-coded to think about scenes and how best to put them together once we basically have all of the rough material. It's kind of like, I would say sort of sculpture. I guess the analogy would be sculpture even more than writing or painting, because you start with a blob of a lot of material, kind of, what the material is, you have a sense of what your what the crux of the story is, but then as you're chipping away, it's sort of coming to life, and what you have to eliminate or add to make it work. But yes, it's really in the post that the story really takes hold.
And I really liked the tone of the film. Like there was a lot of shadows and it just felt very elevated. So did you have any reference points, I guess, to capture that sort of color or grading? I feel like usually, I don't know, usually when I see work from that area, because I think of, well, I mean, this is in DR, but Haiti, when I see, usually they're like super bright or contrasty, and this was not like that. So I think it gave it a very different flair. I guess what went into that decision, and were you looking at any sort of comps for that?
Trying to think about what the comps were that we were kind of thinking of. I think it was more this idea of sort of navigating between dreamlike spaces to kind of get at an emotional core, almost like reflecting her personality a bit. Like she's there's a soft spokenness to her, but that's very determined. And so the idea was sort of maybe to reflect it more in the visuals. And I think we wanted a softness. Again, I think it was this idea of honoring the space in a way, and alluding to what we had talked about earlier, this idea of honoring the space and the potential beauty that could come out of it. And so, yeah, there weren't any like really direct references. It was really sort of in the moment what we were thinking. I think there's a section in the film where Elena is singing in this church. And I have to say, I was so deeply moved when we entered that space. I felt like I had traveled back in time to, a moment, in a plantation in slavery where, you know, uh, folks were coming together and celebrating on religion, even the way the music was being played, the instruments, the singing. It was very, very transformational. And I spoke to the DP at that time, and we really felt that we needed to cover it more around shadows and dream and this idea of memory sort of being embedded in it. And I think that's part of what, was driving the look and the approach.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the tone